Hello and welcome to the Master of Business podcast with me, Noel Dennis, Associate Dean at Teesside University International Business School.
So welcome to this latest edition of the Master of Business podcast. I'm delighted today to be joined by Mansoor Soomro, who is a senior lecturer in sustainability and international business here at Teesside University International Business School. He is also the lead for the Innovation and Enterprise strand of our Future of Work Research Centre. Mansoor, delighted to have you here today.
Hello,
Welcome.
Noel. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Sheer pleasure.
Well, it's great to have you here. So we're going to be talking about quite a topical and very interesting thing today. We're talking about your research that's looking into the recovery, if you like, for businesses coming out of the pandemic, which thank goodness we are starting to see some normality coming out. But I think there's going to be a lot of picking up the pieces, if you like, following this. So, Mansoor, let's start like we always do on this podcast to find out a little bit about you. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your career journey, and also your fascinating area of research.
Fantastic, Noel. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
My pleasure.
I listened to the past podcasts and you'll be doing great work, interesting conversations. So glad to be here. In terms of my career, I started my career with from the corporate industry. So I worked for close to 7 years with the German multinational company Siemens, or as the Germans call it, Siemens. So I worked for 7 years with them, then moved into consultancy, academia, training, so mix and match in terms of that. And now I'm hardcore in terms of research and teaching and a full-time faculty. And currently working with Teesside University and this role that you just mentioned. So in terms of my teaching areas and research, I'm currently focused on two areas. One is resilience, which is how companies and businesses can come out of the crisis, including COVID as an example. So that's resilience. And the other area that I'm teaching and doing research on is readiness, which is more towards an opportunity that if companies are ready towards, let's say, digital technologies or any other wave or an opportunity in the horizon. So around those two areas, resilience and readiness, that's where my teachings and research is currently involved. The Future of Work Research Center that we have here. So I'm also pleased to be contributing towards their agenda in terms of innovation and enterprise. We're looking at commercialization and IP role. Slightly picking up on that. So interesting area to work on.
Fascinating. So what was the driver then? So obviously you work in industry in Siemens. Obviously we know is a major multinational organization. What was the driver to bring you over to academia?
Yeah, fantastic. As they say, life is short, right? So I spent close to 7 years. It was a fantastic progression. So 6 promotions in 7 years.
Congratulations. That is impressive.
Thank you. So enjoyed that. Worked in 4 or 5 countries, global teams. Having seen that and done that, I was looking at, exploring more organizations, interacting with more people. And that's where the academia inspired me, right? So getting to talk to people. And so industry is fine, yeah, but I wanted to have understanding in terms of research and then collaborations, stakeholders, engagement. And that is what inspired me to move to academia and take a transition from there and look at the other side as well, that we do talk about industry, academia linkages, but it's good to see the other side and speak from both angles.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really great thing to have that, actually, to have that practitioner knowledge of the industry and then to be able to put that into practice. And I guess as well, to challenge some of the theory around management that it's been created by management educators who've not necessarily spent a great deal of time in industry. So sometimes what's written down in textbooks and what we're teaching isn't always how it works in practice. So it's nice to have that angle, would you say?
Well said. Exactly. So those two perspectives, they blend well, but at times we see that they are poles apart. So
yeah. So it's and there is a move, isn't there, now? I think in management education for that, that research to become more practical in nature. So it is having an impact on organisations, and I guess that's what we're doing here at the business school now through that Future of Work research centre, so it has that applied value. So, well, brilliant story there, Mansoor. And again, we're delighted to have you on the podcast, but we're also delighted to have you here at Teesside University International Business School. So, I know you've been in a few months now, but you're still fresh in the door, so to speak. So today's topic, then, we're talking specifically about recovery from the pandemic, and you've come up with 5 don'ts for businesses to consider, haven't you? So I think if you're okay with this, we'll take this one at a time. So, Mansoor, what is number 1 don't that you would suggest businesses don't do?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes. So, recovering from the pandemic. So, let me just give you a brief context, and then we pick the first one. So,
yeah, sure.
So, and as we all understand that, our world has changed more in the past 2 years than it has in the past 2 decades, which is phenomenal, right? The findings of my research. So, I surveyed around 400 participants from 19 countries during this crisis, and there are 2 interesting findings here. Number one is that around 45% of the participants that are surveyed responded that COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in a permanent change in their business model, which is significant, which means the way we were working before and the way we are working now and the way we will be working in the near future, these dots might not be a linear, right? So that's one.
Yeah.
Number 2, which is even more interesting, is that around 72% of participants that are surveyed responded that their work habits have changed. So, which is that, yes, they were doing the same work, but they're not doing it the same way, which is things have changed. And if things have changed, so it has changed for both individuals as well as organizations and managers and the whole circle around. Indeed. So with those 2 mega statistics that I just now mentioned, there are 5 don'ts that I've drafted, and we're doing a research paper on that. So this is an initial insight into that. So the first one is that we want the businesses that they should not be fixated on one way of working, right? So as Noel, you saw that, when pandemic came in, right? So all of a sudden people were told, okay, so you can work from home, it's all good, right? So people were thinking whether that's the right move or not. But they said, okay, we'll send you the desktops, laptops, screens, work from home, feel at home, right? And people struggled sometimes for a few weeks, sometimes, in some cases for a few months, but then they were fine. And now this was Bloomberg's article last week here in the UK, conducted in London with 200 finance individuals. And they were asked to join to work in office. 9 out of 10 said, no, thank you. And this was last week.
Really? So, I just coming on that from a personal perspective, I'll never forget that day when I was told to leave the campus and go and work at home. And at that point, I hadn't really done anything with Teams. I hadn't really done much with Skype. So it was a couple of weeks of having to really enhance my digital literacy. But I soon got used to it. And I was talking to a GP last year, and she used this sort of phrase. She said, humans are very good at dehabituating. So we suddenly dehabituated, didn't we? And got into the swing of a new way of working, of getting, in a meeting, a high power meeting, and the door goes and it's DPD, bringing you a parcel. Yeah. And then suddenly we come out of this thing and we suddenly have to start to rehabituate. And that can be a bit of a challenge, can't it? So, people not wanting to go back into the office because they've just got this new way of working at home that's got all the family balanced and everything. It's difficult. So, yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you there, but
No. Absolutely. What you said, it's fantastic. It's exactly what I wanted to say. Just to add here into the perspective, pandemic has given us some evidence here that, working remotely can also be productive, which by far, if you look at like 10 years, 5 years before, was considered that, if you're working at home, you're actually not working. Right. So that myth, that perspective, that dilemma, that's somewhat sorted now. So, for example, my research says, quoting some statistics, so my survey says that, around 65% of employees enjoy working remotely as compared to working in the office. So the survey was done on a global scale, considering 19 countries, right? So it's not one country's perspective, but it's above 50%. So, good number of people do enjoy. I understand that it may not be a best win. It's not perfectly healthy for every one of us, but still there is some significance, some area around there. One more thing to add here in terms of the first don't of the way workplace is that now as we are moving on, recovering from the pandemic, so it's important to understand that employers have to have that flexibility in moving around, which may not be completely work at office, maybe hybrid or maybe remote. You might also have seen a discussion moving on here in the UK about 4-day work week.
Yes.
So, which exactly is like a bit here in this puzzle that, and when we look at the workplace, so the dynamics are changing. So that could be one solution there.
Indeed. So, and I think a lot of organisations now are operating a hybrid model, aren't they? Did your research find any organisations that have completely gone back to insisting on everyone working in the office, or is that rare?
Yes, some of the cases have been like that, but I believe it's still a bit premature to say whether that is the best way to move forward. But for sure, what's the best way to move forward is to have the flexibility. Even within organization, within departments, we need to see some of the departments may need to have a different mode of working and the work style. So I think the need to appreciate is the flexibility in terms of this.
I'm just going to throw a little question at you because it's interesting. I was reading an article on the way in today about are people working more by working at home? So is your personal life and your work life, do they blur into one? And are we finding ourselves actually putting more hours in?
Okay, that's a difficult question to answer. But trying to make it simple, and if I can answer that well, on a personal note, there's a flip side. There are both sides to it. Number one, the good side is that I believe that I'm more productive. In the hybrid mode. Why? Because when we are at work, it's like, people popping into your office, asking for something, and you're gossiping and all that stuff as well, which has a healthy side as well, right?
Yes.
So I'm not saying it's all no, but I'm saying that there has to be a balance between that. So also when we are all in office, right? So there's a culture of meetings, right? So one door to another, one room to another, right? So to some extent it has also been on Teams as well, but we have seen that, productivity, and on a personal note, I've seen the productivity goes up, but a hybrid model would be better in terms of that. So just a mixed perspective on that, but certainly way to move forward on this.
Yeah. I think I am more productive when I'm at home. So, but I love coming into the office and seeing people and having those conversations. But a balance is good. And then you get that day or two at home where you can just focus and do some really productive work. I think that is useful, because the danger we have is we have so many meetings, and where do you actually do the work? Because all of those meetings generate actions, don't they? And then you're finding yourself, I've been in meetings since 8:30 this morning. It's now 6:00. I better start and do some work. And then you find yourself working into the night, don't you? Which is not healthy.
Well said.
If done frequently. Okay, so that's don't number one. So what about don't number two then, Mansoor?
Okay. Yeah, the second don't that's in recovering from the pandemic that businesses should focus on is that don't underestimate the power of technology. So, we have been working on technology solutions since long, but the last 2 years, there has been a tremendous push on this. So it's like, fastest digital acceleration that we have seen in companies, both SMEs as well as the large size organizations. With that thing in perspective, there are two things that through research we have found out. Number one is that there's need for more technology solutions. Number two, there's need for more technology training. Now, what most of the companies think is that, our employees can use Excel, they can use PowerPoint, they know a few applications, right? So they know how to connect on Zoom, Teams, different platforms, right? So we're good to go in terms of upskilling and reskilling. But the need is that the things are changing a lot. And in terms of the virtual space and the technology training, what it says is that there needs to be a massive push here. So some of the companies are upbeat in terms of working on the latest solutions, but we see that a good number of companies are still working out in terms of how to deal with it. So that's one area in terms of technology. That number one, technology solutions. So we will see that learning from the last 2 years, as we come back to the new normal, there will be far too much involvement of technologies. For example, Industry 4.0 technologies like virtual reality, simulations, artificial intelligence, blockchain. And we're talking about not big corporations or established organizations using it. We're talking about even SMEs using it to a large extent.
Absolutely.
So in that case, the perspective that we're trying to explore with the companies is that, do they have digital capabilities to move on to the post-coronavirus future? We are also trying to understand that, can your employees function in the new digital environment? So that's what is keeping us busy these days in terms of research.
Excellent. I think that's fascinating, isn't it? People have had to, no matter what you do, you've had to enhance your digital literacy. So even on a personal level, people had to learn how to grapple with Zoom. Zoom became the new normal, didn't it, in the pandemic, for let's have a Zoom quiz, So we had to develop those skills. But as you say, going forward, all of those things, AI, the virtual reality piece, I mean, that's fascinating. My son's got an Oculus, and we've got a flight simulator, and we put the Oculus on and you sit in the cockpit of an A320 and you feel like you are actually in. It's amazing. And that's going to be transformed, isn't it, to education, maybe disciplines that required, a physical presence. I'm thinking medical. I've seen sort of things where virtual reality, medicine can be, aspects of it can be taught through VR, which is a major breakthrough, isn't it? I guess.
Exactly.
So number 3, what is number 3 then?
Yeah. So moving on from way of working and technology that we discussed, the third theme that we understand that is important for businesses to understand as they recover from the pandemic is to deal with uncertainty. What we have seen is that companies that were mobile in terms of moving freely, and companies that were agile in terms of moving quickly, worked wonders in this pandemic. So pandemic was not, a sorrow story, a hate story, crisis for all the businesses. There are a good number of businesses, for them there has been nothing like a pandemic. And there will be nothing like a pandemic unless they wait for the next crisis. So crisis is also an opportunity, right? So, and some companies, particularly the e-commerce companies and different industries, they growed 300, 400, 500 times. So for them, if you talk to them that, crisis is bad and, COVID was not good, and they say, don't talk to us, right? So, this is the best time. In fact, we're so busy that we won't even talk to you. So there has been time like this. Okay? So when we talk about that, so two things, mobility and agility. So companies need to be companies now need to be more free in terms of moving. Now, what does that mean? It means, as like an easy thing would be that companies should be as fast that, if something happens, so they should be able to move their work from office to home basement of employees, just for an easy understanding. But apart from that, they should be free in terms of the different platforms, different technologies, different opportunities. So that there's a need for that, number one. The second need is in terms of agility, which is moving quickly. What we have seen is that in the COVID crisis, the companies that worked wonders, they were the companies that were perfectly adaptable, right? So they moved fast on this, right? So they didn't wait for news, repercussions, consequences. There were decision-making times and there were deliberations and all that part, as you understand. But despite all that, based on the data, whatever it was, there was no inaction. There was action, maybe sometimes slightly delayed action, but there was a good amount of mobility and agility, which will now, moving from the pandemic, so which will now be the new basis for differentiation. So in terms of the third don't, companies should not be paralyzed by uncertainty. In fact, in this time, they should, number one, be more mobile, which is to move freely, and they should be more agile, which means that they should be working more quickly and learn to find ways where they can work more quickly.
Covering the full range of career development opportunities from higher degree apprenticeships and undergraduate degrees through to postgraduate, doctoral and executive education. Challenge your thinking and secure your future success and impact in the world with Teesside University International Business School. For more information, visit tees.ac.uk/business school.
And so I love this point. I love all the points so far, but this one really resonates with me. So as you know, I'm a jazz musician, and I've been talking since my first publication in 2003 in marketing, in the marketing space. I've been talking about how businesses need to be more like a jazz group. So where there's flexibility within in the group, you interpret a piece of music, it's written down, and you play the melody, but then you can all go off and depart and create something around that melody and return back to the starting point. So I developed this little continuum of a jazzer and a reader organisation. So jazzer organisations are like the organisation you described there. They're agile. They're constantly looking for new things. They're working collaboratively to develop something new, responding to internal and external cues, whereas a reader organisation would stick rigidly to the strategy regardless of what is going around them. And I think, I've done a little bit of speaking about this throughout the pandemic, and I think those organisations that you're describing there that adapted with speed and created new business models, they're examples in my book of a jazzer organisation. But in order to do that, it's a culture, isn't it? You've got to have the right culture and structure to allow that creativity, that agility to build and foster. Is that a fair point?
Absolutely. First of all, your perspective on combining jazz, and that is beautiful. And the way you describe it, I've read some of your work, and I would request a separate sitting with you on that. Right, so I need to learn from you on that. So because it's a beautiful perspective, combining jazz with businesses and the orchestra and the synchrony and the rhythm. It's not only interesting, but and not only it's beautiful, but it's a fresh and novel perspective on looking at businesses. So I would request a second sitting with you on that. So that's
I would be delighted to do that, and I think there's probably a piece of work that we could maybe do on number 3 together in terms of, so we'll talk about that, and we'll do another podcast episode on it. But no, I think I'm a big fan. My sort of mantra, if you like, in management education is to look at alternative lenses to sort of make sense of what's happening in business. And jazz for me is just that alternative lens. It's helped me make sense of, which started out in the marketing space, but it's gone a lot broader now. And I think that's really important that we don't just rely on management discourse to sort of inform us, that we actually look at other lenses as well.
Brilliant.
Wonderful. Mansoor, so we are now at number 4. What is number 4 all about?
Yes. So, we saw this during the last 2.5 years that, there's a lot of uncertainty, and when there's a lot of uncertainty, there's lack of information. When there's lack of information, there is a big space for misinformation and disinformation. So misinformation is misleading information, so misconstrued information, and disinformation is incorrect or false information right from the start. And what we saw during the pandemic around the world is that misinformation and disinformation, the risk for both of them increased tremendously. So both on political grounds, economic grounds, social grounds. So as simple as the rate of COVID infections to the mortalities, and the fatalities and deaths and all that, right? So we're talking about the global side of it. So reporting, different countries reporting on different angles from different perspectives. So what does this translate to for businesses? My findings of the survey reflect that over 42% of the respondents uh, doubted the various statistics that were revolving around during the pandemic crisis, and which then on a managerial side led to some part of inaction, because they were trying to first do the fact checking whether these statistics are correct and whether we would be move on with that, whether that makes sense or not. A lot of policy making was done in this particular time, which was abrupt. In that case, the policy was released first and it was fixated, corrected later, which is again part and parcel of the way the innovation and improvement comes in. So, but one thing that we have to, what I understand from the work that I'm doing with the organizations, what I've understood is that this pandemic has taught us a lesson in terms of misinformation and disinformation. And the lesson is that there is need for more fact checking, number one. And as World Health Organization representative quoted it well, that we're not just fighting a pandemic, we are fighting an infodemic. And that is actually the real battle. So, and considering, moving it from epidemic to pandemic, and again, talking about infodemic. So from businesses, again, there are major lessons here. And as we recover from the pandemic, we need to see that how would we channel, how would we communicate, how would we work on the communication lines within the organization, like the wave of information, what technology platforms and policies can be used for fact-checking, trust building. So this has opened up a completely new box, and the companies should be more now, moving from the pandemic, they should be more focused in terms of, the trust building perspective on this.
That's really interesting. Infodemic. What a great term, but you're right. It got to a point, didn't it? And I think it still is now, where you're reading information. It's so disparate, and who do you believe? It is a challenge, and I think that's rising, isn't it? As well, with platforms like TikTok and things,
Exactly.
it can be quite dangerous, particularly for the younger generation as well, who are submerged in that. I'm thinking I've got young kids and they've got TikTok, and they'll come and say things to me, and I'm like, what? That's not true. That is not true. But it is a concern that these platforms can shape mindsets,
True.
in the wrong way. Dare I say it? Possibly. Not always. Put that disclaimer out there. But you're right. We've got access now to a lot of information, haven't we? When I was younger, there were 4 TV channels. Now there are hundreds, and there was no social media. I think social media is it has its pros and cons, should we say, Mansoor? Okay, so last but not least, number 5.
Yes. So from the pandemic, so far we've talked about way of working, technology, uncertainty, misinformation. The 5th area where we want the businesses to look at, based on what we are working on at Future of Work Research Center and the alignment around recovering from the pandemic, resilience and readiness, is that a lot of companies started employee wellness initiatives, which now we are seeing that they want to stop it or halt it or pause it, which would be a step in the wrong direction, right? So we saw that during the pandemic, a lot of people, executives who were ultra busy, all of a sudden they found time for gardening, they time for helping kids with their homework, right? And they found time for, doing different things. We also saw organizations responding well in terms of introducing digital detox programs, mindfulness programs, health and safety initiatives, meditation, right? So we saw that all, which is a good sight, which is a good picture, which is absolutely fine. But now what we see is that as we are recovering from the crisis, and as we are being asked that, a lot of employees and organizations that come back to the previous normal, we might lose this bit, which was a good bit. Right? So as we recover from the crisis, it is imperative, I would say, to understand that mental health is equally important as physical health. And these wellness programs that most of the companies around the world started was a step in the absolutely right direction, and that should continue. So from that perspective, they shouldn't stop these employee wellness initiatives. In fact, they should invest more on this and make it better and make it a habit. So that's the fifth theme that we're working, and in terms of the research on resilience, that this is one good thing that has happened along with many other good things which should not stop. So
It's fascinating. So, in terms of the survey you've done, you might not have the stats to hand there, but how many organisations or percentage of organisations have actually withdrawn that from your sample, or are they all still implementing these programs?
We don't have a clear cut number on that, because the survey we looked at was slightly on a different perspective on that theme. So what we found out was that around 65% of executives picked up a new hobby or a new routine in the pandemic, which consciously or subconsciously was aimed at reducing the pandemic stress. So because the survey that we did was more on executives and individuals, so the unit of assessment was not companies. So, but what you mentioned, that how many of those companies have put a stop there or have halted that those wellness programs, that's an interesting insight, and we would like to explore that in our future study.
I think that would be good to look at. I mean, the frightening thing, isn't it, that you quickly adapt, you dehabituate, as we say, you adapt, and then suddenly restrictions are lifted, and you try and go back to how it was before. I think that's really dangerous, and I would hate for it to, because as you said, there was some good in every problem. There are some opportunities. There were some good things in sort of business terms, in personal terms. There were some positives that came out of that crisis. New business models, new ways of doing things, that work-life balance. Obviously, you shouldn't have to have a crisis to get these new opportunities, but you've got to try and find some positives, haven't you? And I think we did see some positives, particularly in the business world. But if you go back to how it was before, I think it's a challenge, because people have adapted to a new normal.
Exactly.
So what example of wellness things did you come across then? So you mentioned meditation, yoga. I know a large financial institution, I've got a couple of friends in there, they had a weekly online quiz.
Yes. Okay. So we've seen a variety in terms of that. So, for example, some of the companies started Digital Detox Week, which is that because during this pandemic, we're talking about when we were completely in it, right? So it was all remote. So we were even, in certain countries, people were even not stepping out of their home. So they wanted to see a relative or a friend. That was also on the platforms like Zoom and Teams, right? So in that case, Digital Detox Weeks companies introduced, where you have to put away with gadgets and all these technologies, including the smartphone, for a few days or for a few weeks, but on a rotational basis, right? So that's one area we saw that companies were okay with that in an era of smartphone where we cannot live without smartphone. So that's one. Number two, mindfulness. Some organizations started small initiatives that, once in a week they had a 60-minute session in terms of reflection of what they did in terms of being more mindful about the people around in terms of health, safety. And this conversation was done as part of the corporate understanding, but with an impact on society, right? So which means that what did you do to improve this environment around you? And this is like, companies and employers sitting together and they're talking about that. So which is a good side in terms of the social responsibility. We also saw in terms of the increased awareness programs, training programs in terms of health and safety, though this has been a practice for a lot of companies. But what we saw is a new ambition in those programs, which is to care for others. And because pandemic, the best thing, to put it in a way, was that it gave us an idea about, it gave us a perfect example of collective responsibility.
Yes.
right?
Absolutely.
Which is rare to see, right? And that too on a global level. Right, so 3 countries said that, okay, we are fighting it like anything, and then 2 countries surrounding ones, neighboring ones, bordering ones, they said, no, we are struggling with the finances and resources, and if one country does not think of other, then all are in the same box, right? So in terms of that, so in terms of collective responsibility, I think it was fantastic, and despite all the pluses and minuses, but it was a great opportunity for individuals and businesses to learn from this difficult time.
Absolutely. Mansoor, this is a fascinating conversation, but I'm going to draw it to a close and we're going to ask you one final question. What is in the pipeline for you next in terms of your research? How are you going to move this agenda forward?
Fantastic. So, working with we here at the Teesside University International Business School, there are 2 research centers on which we're working on tremendously. Number one is Future of Work Research Center. So in that, we would like to understand more in terms of how number one, the work will change, and number 2, the workplace will change. Right. So from those 2 strands, we would like to dig deeper, and this is what me and my team are looking at. Number one. The second area, we also have a second research center in terms of digital transformation. So under that, we are looking at how organizations can be more sustainable, keeping up the pace of digital transformation. So that's one. And then how can they be more ready for the new technologies, upcoming technologies that are coming in? So those 2 are the exciting areas that we are working on, and looking forward to contribute our bit on that.
Brilliant. And presumably any listeners here who want to talk to you more, they can just go to the Teesside University website, find you there, drop you an email, and arrange a conversation. And all your work, I guess, your publications are widely available. So, please do check out Mansoor's work. It's fascinating. And I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've learned a lot from it, and I'm sure all of our listeners will have enjoyed it too. So, Mansoor, thank you so much for your time today. And I wish you every success in your research and your work here at Teesside University International Business School. Take care.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye.